Primary election day in Florida is just a week away.
Stand by to meet the candidates.
Rally 2018 starts right now.
This original program is provided as a public service by WSRE, the League of Women Voters, and Pensacola State College.
Good evening and welcome to Rally 2018. I'm Molly Barrows with WSRE TV.
And I'm Sandra Averhart with WUWF Public Media. This is the first of 3 nights we will be with you for Rally 2018 election coverage on WSRE TV, PBS for the Gulf Coast. We are also simulcasting on News Radio AM 1620 and FM 92.3.
Primary election day is August 28th. Tonight, Tuesday, and again on Wednesday night, you will meet the candidates from primary races in Escambia, Santa Rosa, and Okaloosa counties, as well as the candidates for the state races that impact these counties. The seat for the 1st U.S. Congressional District is also on the ballot.
Tonight, the spotlight is on that congressional race, as well as the races for Florida House Districts 1 and 2. On Tuesday night, we'll meet the school board candidates for all 3 counties, including Okaloosa School Board Districts 1, 3, and 5, Santa Rosa Districts 1, 3, and 5, as well as Escambia School Board Districts 1, 2, and 3.
And on Wednesday night, we'll focus on the races for Santa Rosa County Commission Districts 2 and 4, Escambia County Commission Districts 2 and 4, and the race for the mayor of Pensacola.
The questions that will be put before the candidates have been provided to us by committees of the Pensacola Bay Area League of Women Voters and the League of Women Voters of Okaloosa and Walton counties. The candidates have not seen the questions. In each race, they will each be asked the same questions, and they will have 45 seconds to respond. At the conclusion of the question and answer session, each candidate will have 45 seconds to deliver a closing statement. Our candidates tonight are seated in and will be introduced in alphabetical order by district.
And we begin tonight with the races for Florida House Districts 1 and 2. District 1 covers most of Escambia County, and District 2 covers parts of Escambia and Santa Rosa counties. The race for House District 1 is a closed primary, and the race for House District 2 is a universal race, meaning it is open to all registered voters in that district, and the election will be decided on the primary date.
In the contest for District 1, there are 5 candidates on the ballot, 3 Republicans and 2 Democrats. Let's meet them. Miss Rebecca Bidlack, Miss Lisa Doss, and Miss Francine Cecilia Mathis are not attending Rally this evening. We are welcoming Miss Vicki Garrett of Pensacola and Mike Hill of Pensacola. They are here to receive the questions.
And in the race for District 2, there are 2 candidates. Both are Republican, and we'll meet them now. The first candidate is Mr. Alex Andrade. He lives in Gulf Breeze. And seated next to him is Mr. Greg Merck. He lives in Pensacola. Candidates, welcome.
Molly and I will be alternating questions for these races, starting alphabetically by district. We will begin with this first question, and it will go to Miss Garrett, first of District 1. First question. As the state continues to increase the allocation of funds to the charter school system, how can the traditional public school system continue to be adequately funded?
Well, first I want to thank you for this opportunity. I would be very supportive of protecting and increasing the public education budget. I think that the only reason that we should be allowing public funds to go towards charter schools if we hold them to the same standards and level of transparency. So to answer your question, to shore up the public education is I would like to see that funding remain with the public education system.
All right, thank you. That question to you now, Mr. Hill. As the state continues to increase the allocation of funds to the charter school system, how can the traditional public school system continue to be adequately funded?
They both can be adequately funded. It's just a matter of allocating the resources to both. I believe in school choices when it comes to educating our children. Not only just charter schools and public schools, but I also think we should have private schools, home schools, even schools on the internet, and also trade schools, so that when a child graduates from high school, they have a skill where they can go and get a job. So I think we need to have more choices for our parents to choose what's best for their children, because more choices we have, that means competition, and that means that all will increase and get to a higher level of excellence.
All right, thank you. And now, Mr. Andrade, I believe this next question will go to you. How can the traditional public school system continue to be adequately funded?
Thank you so much for hosting this event tonight to both UWF and WSRE. This is an incredible opportunity to come and address the voters. When I look at the public school system at C.A. Weiss Elementary School, which is the first community school in the state of Florida, right here in Escambia County, and seeing the opportunities there in partnership with both federal and private funds to bring that school from an F to a C in 1 year. When you actually start looking at using intelligent funding and prioritizing opportunities to take away some of the distractions that some of these children face, we see that there are evidence-based programs that will result in success.
All right, thank you very much. Did you have anything else?
Oh, no, you're fine.
The bell is your 5-second warning. I believe that's it. So just
yes,
for your information. And finally, Mr. Merck, this first question to you. As the state continues to increase the allocation of funds to the charter school system, how can the traditional public school system continue to be adequately funded?
Well, first, you know, I look at this thing as who the money belongs to. I believe that that money belongs to the student, right? And parents, the best education is a system where parents have the most flexibility. I don't think that the money belongs to Washington. I don't believe that it belongs to the education unions. I believe it belongs to the students, and I think that it is the parents who understand best how their students, how their children should be educated. I believe in as much choice and as much flexibility as possible when it comes to our education. I think that our students are best served that way. I don't believe the money belongs to Washington. I don't believe it belongs to Tallahassee. I believe that it belongs to that student, and that's the attitude I take when it comes to our education.
All right, thank you.
All right, we're moving on to the next question, and Mr. Hill, continuing on in our rotation, we begin our second question with you. Some local restaurants are offering paper straws because plastics are discarded into waterways and kill marine life. What role should government undertake to assist in this effort?
Well, of course, government should be good stewards of our environment. But when it comes to a business, government should not be dictating to a business what type of material they should use or how they're going to provide their services. You let the market determine that. If the customers decide that they're going to patronize restaurants that use paper instead of plastic straws, then you let the customers decide that. Government should have no role in dictating to a business what type of straws they're going to use. What is more important is how they're being disposed of. So those straws are being left there at the restaurant, so the restaurant should dispose of them properly.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hill. Mr. Andrade, same question to you. Again, what role should government undertake to assist any efforts to help the environment at the expense of business?
I'm a limited government conservative when it comes to Tallahassee telling counties and cities what to do. There's no question that Escambia County is dealing with completely different issues than Miami-Dade. When it comes to what a city or a county wants to do, those municipalities can decide whether or not something's going on that they want to address. I also believe in fundamental rights. I believe that I agree with Mr. Hill on the point that we should let be a little bit more laissez-faire when businesses want to decide on how to use their single-use plastics. I believe that fundamentally we're going to Tallahassee, and it's my understanding right now that unless there's a fundamental reason why Tallahassee should get involved, Tallahassee should stay out of it.
All right, thank you, Mr. Andrade. Mr. Merck.
Yes. I believe that one of the problems with government is they're just always looking for overreach. These are community issues. These are issues that should be addressed with our wastewater treatment. This is not something that I believe that Tallahassee should get involved in. Look, we have paper straws that are covered in plastic. We've got plastic straws that are covered in paper. Look, the government should not be involved in every small issue of our lives as citizens. These are local issues, and I really believe that Tallahassee ought to stay out out of it.
All right, thank you, Mr. Merck. Ms. Garrett, the question is now yours. Would you like for me to repeat it?
No, I think I echo the other comments, and I would agree. I don't think that Tallahassee should be telling the local communities what they should do in that regard. I do think that home rule and the local community should be able to decide what's best for its community. I would say that at the state level, we may look to make sure that there's nothing preventing the local government from doing that, such as preemption and things of that nature. So glad to see we're all in agreement on that.
All right, thank you so much, Ms. Garrett.
All right, we are up to question number 3, and it will go first to you, Mr. Andrade. Media reports in Florida indicate that 12 HMOs set up to provide health care for Medicaid patients are inadequate. What actions should the state take to address this issue?
At the state level, the opportunities that we have to provide and make sure that adequate health care is being provided to citizens is more of a regulatory question than anything else. I guarantee you that there are citizens up in the north side of Escambia County who would love to have medical students and telemedicine opportunities being provided to them. I believe that at the state level, there was a question a few years ago about whether or not to expand Medicaid. The decision was made not to expand Medicaid. The debate is still out, and there's still studies to be done about whether or not that was the right decision. But I believe that the first and foremost opportunity at the state level is to work towards providing adequate health care through telemedicine and opportunities to deregulate.
All right, thank you. Mr. Merck, the question to you, what actions should the state take to address the Medicaid issue?
Well, I'll tell you, our healthcare costs are going through the roof. But you know, with respect to our Medicaid here in Florida, one of the big problems is special interest lobby groups. Listen, the hospital lobbies are making it prohibiting many of the operations that could be performed at clinics from happening. Look, they want to protect their business, and I understand that. But there are numerous operations that can be performed at our at ambulatory clinics at a huge discount. These are operations that might cost $20,000 in a hospital, but $5,000 at an ambulatory clinic. These are issues that need to be addressed. We need to get rid of the influence of special interests and lobbies, and we need to allow a more free enterprise market system to keep the costs of our health care down.
All right, thank you, Mr. Merck. And now this question to you, Ms. Garrett. Media reports in Florida indicate the HMOs set up to provide health care for Medicaid patients are inadequate. What role do you think, or what actions do you think the government should take, the state should take to address this issue?
I do believe that the state should expand Medicaid. I think the state of Florida is one of the few states with the highest uninsured. The Medicaid covers some of our most vulnerable individuals in the state of Florida. So as a state legislature, I would certainly support the expansion of Medicaid. I would go one step further and also say that I would also support a state system that would allow the health care that is provided to state employees to be available to all residents of the state of Florida to be able to buy into that program. You increase your risk pool by bringing down your premiums for a better coverage. So that would be something that I would also be looking at.
All right, finally, the question to you, Mr. Hill. Do you need me to repeat it?
No, thank you. I was serving in the Florida House from 2014 to 2016. In one of those sessions, the Medicaid issue came up. And the reason why we did not expand Medicaid in Florida at that time was because if you look at 2010, Medicaid took up 20% of our budget. Let me say that differently. It was $20 billion of our budget. In 2016, it was $31 billion of our budget. That's an unsustainable trajectory that we were going with the increase of Medicaid. What we need to do instead is save Medicaid for those who truly need it, the disabled and the blinded. Those who are able-bodied adults should not be on Medicaid. And if we want to make it more affordable here in Florida, allow insurance companies to sell insurance across state lines.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hill. Mr. Merck, we begin our next question with you. Florida is one of a few states that does not include a law enforcement agency oversight in the process of issuing concealed weapon permits. How should legislative action be used to address this issue?
Look, when it comes to concealed weapons, look, I am a strong supporter of the NRA. I'm a concealed weapons carrier myself. I believe that the less the state and the less the government can get involved in trying to dictate to us how we're going to carry out our Second Amendment rights, the better. Listen, I look at the law that was passed here last year, the gun law legislation. I believe that that was a mistake. I believe it was a knee-jerk reaction to the Parkland shooting. Listen, I believe that the Second Amendment is a guaranteed right to everybody, and the state ought to revisit that. And as the next state legislator, that is something that I will lead the charge to do. I believe that it is an infringement of the Second Amendment, and it needs to be repealed before the NRA wins it in court.
All right. Mr. Merck, thank you so much. Ms. Garrett, we turn now to you with the same question. Again, Florida, one of a few states that does not include a law enforcement agency oversight in the process of issuing those concealed weapon permits. Should legislative action be taken, and if so, what?
Yes, I do believe that legislative action should be taken. I think that some of the measures that were put in place regarding the gun legislation that was passed last year, some of it went far enough, some of it didn't go far enough, and I think having another layer will just add another layer of safety. I think you can be pro-gun and pro-safety, and I think the state of Florida needs to do a better job of enforcing the safety aspect of gun ownership.
All right, thank you, Ms. Garrett. Mr. Hill, would you like for me to repeat the question?
Please.
Okay. Florida is one of a few states that does not include a law enforcement agency oversight in the process of issuing concealed weapon permits. That's actually done by the Department of Agriculture. So how should legislative action be used to address this issue?
I don't think we need legislative action to address this issue. When I graduated from the Air Force Academy and when I was sworn in as a state representative and served 3 terms there in the House, I said a solemn oath that I swear to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. That Constitution says in our Second Amendment that the right to bear arms shall not be infringed upon by the government. We don't need more government action infringing upon our right, our inalienable God-given right to bear weapons. When I go to Florida, I go to the Florida House, I pledge to file legislation to repeal parts of that bill that was signed into law after the Parkland shooting. I thought that infringed upon our rights, and I am duty-bound to file legislation against it.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hill. Mr. Andrade, would you like for me to repeat the question?
No, I think I understand it. The Second Amendment is a fundamental right. The right to keep and bear arms is fundamental. The same as your right to free speech, the same as your right to due process and your right to privacy. If the legislature is going to do anything that interferes with a fundamental right, it needs to be subject to strict scrutiny, and it needs to be limited in its application. I don't believe that adding a law enforcement component to the issuance of a concealed carry license would be necessary in this case. I don't think it would hold up to strict scrutiny if we were limiting any other right, like the right to free speech. I do not believe that we have to add another layer before we restrict somebody's right to free speech. And that same analysis should apply to the Second Amendment.
All right, thank you, Mr. Andrade.
All right, we are up to question number 5, and we're back to Ms. Garrett. You'll get this one first. Florida is experiencing a major environmental crisis with the rise of sea levels. How can the state be proactive in dealing with this impending catastrophe?
I think several things. Being someone with a planning background, I think we need to do a much better job approaching this issue from a planning perspective as well as a funding perspective. A lot of the trust fund monies that were dedicated to land conservation and other areas that were to help address these environmental concerns and issues have been reduced over the years. So I think one of the major things that we need to do is to make sure that those trust funds are adequately funded and that we go back to managing our growth as we did years ago before the Growth Management Act was removed from statute.
All right, thank you. Mr. Hill, this question for you now. Florida experiencing a major environmental crisis with the rise of sea levels. How can the state be proactive in dealing with this impending crisis or this impending catastrophe?
Well, I think the premise of the question is that this rising sea levels, so-called rising sea levels, is anthropogenic, and it's not. Man is not causing our polar caps to melt and then our sea levels are rising. That is not the case at all. When we have change in our climate, it is because of the 2 biggest factors which affect climate on our planet, which is the sun and our oceans. Now, the sea levels are not rising. There's no scientific measurement of that at all. That's not something that government needs to get involved with. And should government decide to get involved, the only thing I hear is to tax carbon emissions. That is not good public policy, and that is not something that I would support in Tallahassee.
All right, thank you, sir. Mr. Andrade, this question to you. How can the state be proactive in dealing with the impending catastrophe of rising sea levels?
Well, I will say that going to Tallahassee and proving or disproving global warming is not part of my agenda. What is part of my agenda is making sure that our coastal areas are prepared for the actual rise of the seas, which is occurring currently. We have to make sure and prioritize infrastructure spending, making sure that our flood-prone areas are prepared. And I would probably consult with Ms. Garrett, who's got a background in infrastructure and planning, when I look to address those issues. When the head of FEMA, Mr. Fugate, says, "I'm tired of Florida building so close to the ocean when they know the water is rising to meet them," we have to take that seriously with impending disasters. It's a question of priority and funding. It's not a question about whether or not it's happening, because we know it is.
All right, thank you. And finally, to you, Mr. Merck.
Well, I guess apart from raising Moses from the dead to turn back the seas, I'm not sure what the state legislators would do, because I really don't see this as an imminent problem. Look, these things give us hundreds of years of warning, so I don't really believe that it is an imminent danger. What I do believe is that we need to be proactive when it comes to our stormwater management systems. Look, in the cities, we have about 40% of our ground is impervious to water. The water falls in heavy rain showers. It falls on our streets and bridges and our buildings and on concrete and pavement. This is where we need to be proactive in ensuring that our wastewater management system is sufficient to handle these kind of crises. These are the real imminent problems, and we need to stay ahead of the power curve when it comes to ensuring that our wastewater management system is effective.
All right, thank you, Mr. Merck. We turn now to our next question, and we begin with you, Mr. Mike Hill. Florida is known worldwide as the Sunshine State. What can the state do to promote the expansion of solar energy to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels?
Well, the state shouldn't do anything. If you say the state, when you say state, you mean the government. If solar energy is going to be a viable alternative, then it needs to be developed by the market. No subsidies from the government is going to make solar energy more efficient, is going to make it any better than it is right now. And right now it is a very inefficient use of trying to provide for our power sources. What we do have plentiful and clean is gas. Right now the United States has become an exporter of fuel, and so we know we have plenty of it now. Let's not waste money on trying to develop technology which isn't ready yet. Let's let the market do that.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hill. Mr. Andrade, would you like for me to repeat the question?
Sure.
Okay. Florida, known worldwide as the Sunshine State, what can the state do to promote the expansion of solar energy to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels?
That's a great question. I'd like to start by giving a shout out to GE, which manufactures a significant number of wind turbines here in Escambia County. Is an incredible employer that we need to maintain and promote, and be excited that they're here, and thank them that their presence in Escambia County is not going anywhere. The first thing that Florida needs to do is start getting out of the way. It's not a question of whether or not Florida should be involved. Florida is involved. We already have regulations limiting the acreage that solar panels have to be before they have to be openly bid on public property. We have to continue to work with our military partners, several of whom the property that such as Eglin and Hurlburt have solar panels on them, and make sure that we highlight and promote those in the future.
All right, thank you, Mr. Andrade. Mr. Merck, would you like for me to repeat the question?
No, I have the question. Listen, I'm a conservative. I believe that the free market is what should dictate the winners and losers, not government programs, not tax subsidies. Listen, if this is a program that's viable, if this is a program that will work for the people, then it will succeed on its own merits. We shouldn't have the government stepping in and Tallahassee stepping in to try to push these kind of measures through. I believe that the free market, that the people will make their choice between what is a successful endeavor and what is not. I believe that Tallahassee and that our government should stay out of the way. They shouldn't be in the business of picking winners and losers. That is the perspective I have as a conservative. It's the way I've felt my entire life, and that is what I would bring to Tallahassee.
All right, thank you, Mr. Merck. Ms. Garrett, would you like for me to repeat the question?
That's okay. I would say that it's kind of twofold. If we're talking about the actual generation of electricity or power, I would say that the state does have some role in playing in that. And I would think that in order to get us to go into the right direction, in order to be more environmental friendly and to protect our environment, that we need to give incentives for us to start looking at those alternative sources. From an individual standpoint, I think the state should stay out of the way and allow individuals to, if they want to purchase solar for their homes or things of that nature, then that is an area where I think the state should stay out of.
All right, thank you, Ms. Garrett.
All right, we are up to our 7th question this evening, and it will go first to you, Mr. Andrade. The Florida closed primary system prevents a large percentage of qualified voters from participating. What is your position on changing to a system that would allow voters with no party affiliation to participate in primary elections?
What an incredible question. I'd like to remind everyone at home that this is an open primary. Democrats and independents will be able to vote for me this August, and I hope that they do. My position fundamentally is that our current system does disenfranchise voters in safe seats. This seat would be considered safe if we had a write-in who happened to join at the last minute. In this circumstance, we don't have a write-in, and so everybody does get to have a choice in August. I believe that the bigger travesty is the fact that we have state-subsidized primaries to begin with. Republicans who claim to be small government conservatives have taxpayer money funding our party primaries, and I believe that's the first question we need to start asking.
All right, thank you. Mr. Merck, this question to you now. The Florida closed primary system prevents a large percentage of qualified voters from taking part. What is your position on changing to a system that would allow voters with no party affiliation to take part in primaries?
Well, look, I believe that the system works as it is. Our race, because there's no Democrat, is an open primary. But listen, I believe that if you're a Republican, you ought to be registered as a Republican if you want to vote for a Republican candidate. I believe that that is the best measure, because I don't believe that that certain constituents should be allowed to be energized from their base to enter other races, to potentially put in candidates that would be the worst candidates that a Republican Party, for example, would face in their opposition. I like the system the way it is. Look, if you're a Republican, you ought to be registered as a Republican to vote in those primaries. So I disagree with my opponent. I like the system as it is. I believe that the system ought to remain intact.
All right, thank you. And now to you, Ms. Garrett. What is your position on changing to a system that would allow these no party affiliation voters to take part?
I think in the years to come, it is a issue that we're going to have to face right away. The increase in the number of NPA registered voters is on the uptick, and we're probably going to have a 3-party system possibly in my lifetime. And I would say that I could foresee us having that measure on the ballot for the voters to decide how they want to continue having the voting system. And I think most voters would like to have the opportunity for the primaries to be open for everyone to be able to vote. I can tell you that from a candidate perspective, closed primaries are a little bit better for the candidates, but I would like to see what the voters want to do, and I think that an amendment on the ballot would be the way to find that out.
Okay, thank you. And finally to you, Mr. Hill, what is your position on the Florida closed primary and any potential changes to it?
Well, the reason why we have these closed primaries now is because in the past, when they didn't have the system the way it is, the system was being gamed, and there were candidates from other parties who were trying to get into a particular Republican or Democrat race just to try and game the system. So it was a move to make sure that if you're a Republican, you vote for Republicans. If you're a Democrat, you vote for Democrats. Now, those who are out there who are no party affiliates, if you want to be able to vote in the primary, then register as either a Republican or a Democrat or for some party so that you can get on the ticket. That is the voter's choice. So if the voters want to choose something different, an open primary or a closed primary, then what they should do is register as your party affiliation.
All right, thank you.
All right, Mr. Andrade, did you have a rebuttal?
I did. I wanted to point out that my distinction is about whether or not the state and the taxpayer should be subsidizing these private party decisions. One of the biggest issues in our Florida Attorney General's Republican primary is the fact that Frank White is not taking taxpayer subsidies for his campaign. The real question I'm trying to get across to the viewer is the fact that we have taxpayers subsidizing Republican and Democrat primaries when Republicans and Democrats should probably be paying for that for themselves if they hold up the ideals that they claim to hold up.
All right, thank you, Mr. Andrade. We have our final question, one more question for these candidates, and we begin with you, Mr. Merck. With an increase in deaths from drug overdoses, how would you address the opioid crisis in Florida?
Look, you know, I've talked to many doctors regarding this issue, and I'll tell you what we really have is a heroin problem, and it's being conflated with opioids. There are issues and problems that we had years ago with doctors overprescribing these medications. But I'll tell you, you talk to the doctors and you talk to the medical examiners, and they will tell you that we have a heroin problem. This is an issue that needs to be addressed, and there's a bigger issue. It's a cultural one, and we need to really address why kids are getting involved in these kind of drugs. And I think that when we address it from that issue and we start looking at families and looking how fathers are absent in raising their children and how we are perpetuating the cycle of poverty with young girls having children, this is a cultural issue, and this is really where we can be most effective in finding a solution.
All right, thank you, Mr. Merck. Ms. Garrett?
Yes, I would say that we first need to look at the data and see what that's telling us, because I think that the crisis is being fueled by many different things. And so whether it's from mental health, whether it's systemic poverty and things of that nature. So I think depending on what each community is experiencing and what the data and statistics are showing us, that would help us to create a better solution that targets that area specifically.
All right, thank you, Ms. Garrett. Mr. Hill, would you like for me to repeat the question?
Oh, thank you. What we have is a crisis, there's no doubt about that. But what we don't need is for government to make the crisis even worse. And recently legislation was passed which restricted doctors from giving pain medication to those who really needed it and might need it longer than the prescribed government time. Government needs to get out of the way when it comes to what's happening between a doctor and his patient. Now the problem is we're having this problem of these drugs coming across our border. I agree with President Donald Trump, we need to build the wall to stop not only illegal immigration, but also to stop the crime that is coming across our borders in the forms of human trafficking and illegal drugs coming across our borders. Let's stop the flow of it first.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hill. Mr. Andrade?
Would you mind repeating the question?
Absolutely not. Okay. With an increase in deaths from drug overdoses, how would you address the opioid crisis in Florida?
Thank you very much. When the sheriff of Okaloosa County, Sheriff Larry Ashley, says he found enough fentanyl to kill every citizen in his county, we have to start taking the issue seriously. I disagree with Mr. Hill. I do not believe that the answer is to allow doctors to prescribe more pills. The question the voters have already discussed is opening up the opportunity for medicinal marijuana. We have to start opening up and making our process for medicinal marijuana be more efficient and less ostracized. We have to look at every opportunity to provide patients in pain with other non-lethal opportunities other than opioids.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Andrade. And that concludes our questions. Oh, yes, Mr. Hill, you have a rebuttal?
Yes, please.
Yes, please go ahead.
The point that I was making was that government should not be involved in the decisions made between a doctor and the patient. Government has no role in that. I also disagree that we need to open up to medicinal marijuana, because medicinal marijuana will only lead to recreational marijuana, which will then lead to legalization of marijuana, which will be a destruction in this state. If you want evidence of it, look at what's happening in Colorado right now. Look at Oregon. Look at parts of California. It's a disaster.
All right. Thank you so much, candidates. And that does conclude our question and answer session for Florida House races Districts 1 and 2. It is time now for closing statements.
Moving alphabetically, we last started with Mr. Merck, and so the concluding statements will begin with Ms. Garrett. 45 seconds.
Thank you. My name is Vicki Garrett, and I am running for the State House District 1 seat. I feel I'm the best candidate to represent District 1 in Tallahassee because I'm from Pensacola. I grew up in this district. I have over 20 years experience in the public and private sector. Some of the public agencies I have worked for is the Florida Department of Transportation, Escambia County Engineering Department, and most recently the West Florida Regional Planning Council. I have a proven track record of bringing resources back to the community. I have a master's degree in public administration. I would invite you to go to my website for more information, electVickiGarrett.com. I thank you for your vote and your support.
All right, Ms. Garrett, thank you. Mr. Hill, your closing statement.
The United States of America is a magnificent nation, the most benevolent, the most powerful nation that the world has ever seen. And what has made it that way is because we are founded as a Christian nation that celebrated the rights of the individual, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, equal treatment under the law, and a constitution that limits its government. And if we're going to make America great again, we must get back to those foundational beliefs and principles that made this nation so great. I'm going to ask the people of faith to rise up and vote for me on August 28th. We are in a battle for the soul of this nation, and we need someone who is going to rise up, accept the responsibility placed before them, and to make sure that we elect people in office that will support, protect, and defend our Constitution.
All right, thank you. And now, Mr. Andrade, your opportunity for a closing statement, 45 seconds.
I want to thank everybody at home for the opportunity to seek to serve you in the Florida House. When I got into this race in November, I got in with the blessings of my wife, Jessica, at home, and with the incumbent, Frank White. I want to thank Frank for endorsing me to replace him, and I want to thank the over 1,200 voters in Escambia County who signed a petition to put me on this ballot. This has been an incredible year for me, knocking on thousands of doors, meeting thousands of voters, and listening to the issues that people care about. I want to make a promise to you tonight that when I'm elected on August 28th, I will immediately get to work for you. It's the same way I've been working for this community since I've moved here, from founding unbiased Pensacola to serving you on the Florida Judicial Nominating Commission. Thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. And finally, Mr. Merck, to you for your closing statement.
Thank you. I'm Greg Merck. You can go to votemerck.com to learn more. Listen, this election is about two very different candidates. I believe that Tallahassee needs more leaders, not more lawyers. As a career military officer and pilot, I've had extraordinary experiences. I've been taught about leadership and how to solve problems. It's the kind of thing we need in Tallahassee. And as a dad, I understand firsthand the challenges we're facing raising our children in a time that is very different than when I grew up. Listen, I believe that good government is smaller government, fiscally responsible government. Not one that picks winners or losers, but one that lets the free market decide. One that gives parents more choice and flexibility with respect to education. One that looks after our veterans. And one that will work with President Trump, not against him, in enforcing our immigration laws. That's why I'm asking for your support. I'm asking you to vote to put Merck to work for you in Tallahassee.
All right, thank you. Candidates for Florida House Districts 1 and 2. We are taking a short break now. When we come back, we'll meet the candidates for the 1st Congressional District.
Rally 2018 primary election coverage continues right after this. Stay with us.
There is nothing more important to our democratic process than having an informed electorate voting on Election Day. Good evening. I am Ed Meadows, President of Pensacola State College, thanking you for tuning into this rally, a joint presentation of the League of Women Voters, WSRE TV, and Pensacola State College. Rally allows you the opportunity to watch and listen as this election year's slate of candidates answer the tough questions concerning the needs of our community. WSRE, a service of Pensacola State College, is proud to bring this program to you as a public service. And as always, we invite your comments and suggestions about how we can further fulfill our community obligations. Let's all remember the importance of participating in the governance process by voting in the upcoming election.
There are 3 ways to cast a ballot in Escambia County: by mail, early voting, or at your precinct on Election Day. To vote by mail, contact the Escambia County Supervisor of Elections office. You can write, phone, fax, email, log on to their website, or ask in person at the supervisor's office on Palafox Place in downtown Pensacola. Ballots must reach the Supervisor of Elections office by 7 p.m. on Election Day. Early voting takes place from Saturday, August 18th through Saturday, August 25th at the 8 locations listed on the screen. Early voting times are 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. at the Supervisor of Elections office and from 9 a.m. until 6 p.m. at all other locations. On the day of the primary election, Tuesday, August 28th, voting takes place at your polling location from 7 a.m. until 7 p.m. You must vote in the precinct in which you live and are registered. To verify your precinct, log on to escambiavotes.com. Be sure to bring photo and signature ID with you. Welcome back to Rally 2018 on WSRE TV, PBS for the Gulf Coast. This is the first of 3 nights where we will introduce you to the candidates in the upcoming primary election. They have the opportunity to answer questions that were prepared by committees of the Pensacola Bay Area League of Women Voters and the League of Women Voters in Okaloosa and Walton counties.
Now it's time to meet the candidates for U.S. Congress District 1, our final race tonight. This congressional district includes Escambia, Santa Rosa, Okaloosa, and Walton counties, and a portion of Holmes County. There are 5 candidates on the ballot, 3 Republicans and 2 Democrats. They are seated in and will be introduced in alphabetical order. The first candidate tonight is Mr. Chris Dosif. He resides in Pensacola. Seated next to him is Mr. Phil Ayer. He also resides in Pensacola. Next to him is seated Mr. Matt Gates of Fort Walton Beach. John Mills is seated next to him. He lives in Miramar Beach. And next to him is Jennifer Zimmern. She resides in Pace. Candidates, welcome to you all.
All right, thank you so much for joining us, and Sandra and I will alternate asking questions in this race. And starting alphabetically, we begin with Mr. Dosif. This first question is for you, sir. Florida has been exempted from new drilling proposals, but currently there is discussion to allow drilling in all coastal waters, as well as proposals to weaken the industry safety rules imposed following the Deepwater Horizon disaster. Please explain your position on these proposals.
My position first is that I'm 100% opposed to drilling off the coast of Florida. I see that our coast is, I consider it no different than our national monuments of Yellowstone and Yosemite, and it should be protected as such. We have a military mission here, and I suspect that it'd be in the best interest of both the military and our local area residents that we do not proceed with that. As far as lowering the standards for safety, I think that's a mistake. We need to make sure and maintain those standards. It's as a result of those standards not being properly met that we had the BP oil disaster.
All right, thank you, Mr. Dosif. Mr. Gates, you have a rebuttal?
Yeah, I wanted to add that in Northwest Florida, we are about bases and beaches. That's what makes our economy work. It's what makes Northwest Florida such a wonderful place to live. I've been leading the fight in the Congress to block offshore oil drilling off of our coast. 50% of the economy in Northwest Florida is based on the military mission. And one of the strategies I've used to stop drilling is to get over $70 million authorized to be spent to enhance the telemetry systems and the radar systems so that we can enhance our research and development mission. That's good for the military, it's good for our environment, it's good for Northwest Florida.
All right, thank you, Mr. Gates. Mr. Ayer, would you like for me to repeat the question?
Sure.
Okay. Florida has been exempted from new drilling proposals, but currently there's discussion to allow drilling in all coastal waters, as well as proposals to weaken the industry safety rules that are already imposed following the Deepwater Horizon disaster. Please explain your position on these proposals.
I am definitely completely against offshore drilling off of Florida's coast. And I would think that a congressman who is saying what Mr. Gates has just said would also be concerned about new drilling off of Alabama's coast. It's right next to Perdido, by the way. So I find it that we have not learned properly the lessons of the BP oil spill, else we would have maintained the regulation for public oversight over the safety valves. And ask yourself the question, what is the chaos that is in Washington, D.C.? Do we have a coherent policy from the federal government on offshore oil drilling? And the answer is no, because you hear different voices, and I find that our congressman, when he talks about it, is not being genuine in his support for no offshore drilling.
Thank you, Mr. Ayer. Mr. Gates, would you like for me to read the question?
No, I understand the question perfectly well, and I understand it because it's my legislation in the Congress that I've sponsored alongside Verd Buchanan and Francis Rooney. We actually worked across party lines to get both Republicans and Democrats from the Florida delegation on board to make the military mission line permanent. Here's the important point I want to make to our outstanding community. Right now, the military mission line that extends south from Mobile is set to expire in the year 2022. That's why we need leadership in the Congress so that we can get it reauthorized. Because I'm the only candidate in this race endorsed by President Trump, I can work with the administration to make sure that Northwest Florida's values and priorities are put first. I've personally spoken with the President about this. Matter of fact, we had a great conversation about it on Air Force One, and we've got a great plan to protect Northwest Florida's beaches.
I've got a rebuttal to that, please.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Joseph.
Well, I'm very glad to see that Congressman has decided to follow my lead. Back in 2016, when we were running in the primary, his response to offshore drilling was a simple one. Well, my mother always said, never say never. I said never. And I'm very happy that he's adopted my lead on that, because my point and my plan at that point was, in fact, the leadership's position, that we shouldn't be doing that. And the rest of the Congressional committee in this state understood it for what it was. We needed to protect our beaches. I'm very pleased to see that he's decided to follow my lead.
Mr. Ayer, did you also have a rebuttal?
Yes, please. So we have the congressman who's just told us about his legislation. Well done on that. It's not good enough. What is good enough is if you challenge the administration you support, so we get coherence out of Secretary Zinke and the President, to just be clear. And we don't have clarity, and what we have is chaos, policy chaos.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ayer. We turn our question now to you, Mr. Mills. Would you like for me to repeat it?
Sure.
Okay. Florida has been exempted from new drilling proposals, but currently there is discussion to allow drilling in all coastal waters, as well as proposals to weaken industry safety standards that were passed in the wake of Deepwater Horizon disaster. What is your position on these issues?
Sure, I'm opposed to weakening standards. By all means, we should mitigate and protect. But when we talk about the waters of Florida, if they're state territorial waters, we should consider what the state itself wants. We are running for a federal office, and federal overreach is what I'm opposed to, but I support whatever the state supports. Absolutely do not agree to lax the standards by any means at all.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mills. Ms. Zimmerman, we now turn this question to you. Would you like for me to repeat it?
Yes, please.
Okay. So again, Florida exempted from new drilling proposals, but currently there is discussion to allow drilling in all coastal waters, as well as proposals to weaken safety standards that were put in place after the Deepwater Horizon disaster. What is your position on these proposals?
Well, as you very well know, I'm a pediatrician, and obviously this touches not only the military mission, but also the health of the people in Florida. We must not ever compromise the health of the children and the health of our people here in the state. Remember, what happens in those waters will affect everyone. What happened in the BP oil spill? We suffered from all kinds of consequences. We muddied the waters. Anytime we do not follow protocols that have been put in place from our experience in what happened after the oil spill, we will put everyone in a compromising situation. I agree with all my other co-candidates over here. We must put our military mission first and foremost, because that is very vital to our area, but the health of our children must always be considered.
All right, thank you, Ms. Zimmerman.
All right, we are up to question number 2, and it will go first to Mr. Ayer. Some 30 million Americans remain uninsured, but the Affordable Care Act is being dismantled, including affordable coverage for people with pre-existing conditions. What is your plan to help Americans get medical insurance coverage?
Well, look, everybody in America ought to be able to see a doctor when they need to see a doctor. And we have too many people with one disease or an accident away from bankruptcy. Costs of drugs are way too high. Costs of insurance premiums are way too high. We have in my party, the Democratic Party, we have a disagreement on this. Some people who want Medicare for all or universal health care. I'm one of those people who say, let's solve the issue with what we can achieve in the next Congress. And that means repairing, in my view, repairing the Affordable Care Act that happens to be the law of the land, have the federal government get the authorization to negotiate drug prices and get those prices down with low-hanging fruit rather than a big sweeping plan.
All right, thank you. Mr. Gates, this question next to you. I could repeat it.
No, I've got it.
Basically, what is your plan to help Americans get medical insurance coverage?
First, it's important to acknowledge that Obamacare has been a disaster. Rising health care premiums, employer mandates, individual mandates, and not better health care outcomes for the American people. If Democrats take control of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi and the liberal left will be pushing the most expansive overreach of federal health care ever in American history. But I'm going to be there to fight against them for free market principles. My plan would include buying insurance across state lines. It would allow for more health savings accounts. And we would have physician-led care, but we could utilize mid-level providers to be able to provide primary care at a lower cost. The big flaw with Obamacare is that it was exclusively focused on insurance coverage and not lowering the cost of care. That's what conservatives are fighting for.
Rebuttal, Mr. Ayer first.
Okay, so what we just heard is the classic Trumpian response to repeal and replace. Where is the replacement? It's not there. What we need to have is an administration that is not undercutting undercutting the current law and hurting families at every turn. And what we do need is to focus on practical solutions and not an ideologically driven destruction. Where's the replacement?
All right, Mr. Dosif, your rebuttal.
Well, my opponent had the opportunity to stop a bad piece of legislation entering into President Trump's hands as the deciding vote in the Budget Committee. And we could have completely repealed Obamacare at that point in time, but that did not happen. Unfortunately, now we're stuck in a situation where we're somewhat in limbo. I think that we need to take seriously what we're doing with health care. The reason Obamacare was even introduced to us was as a result of not dealing properly with folks with pre-existing conditions. That's where we need to focus our attentions.
All right, thank you. We'll move on now. The question to you now, Mr. Mills. I'll repeat it for you.
It's okay. You don't need to repeat it. So the Affordable Health Care Act is anything but affordable. Obamacare is disastrous. It needs to be repealed. I'm not talking about repeal and replace. I'm talking about repealing this disastrous health care bill. I've been burned by this myself personally. My insurance rates have gone up. It's a disaster. It's a complete disaster. We need open markets, and we need to work with the states to see what's best, that the states say it's best for their states, and work from that approach. The federal government typically does its overreach. The federal government comes in, they create more problems than they solve. Let's work with the states and see what the states have to say about it.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mills. And now to you, Ms. Zimmerman. What is your plan to help Americans get medical insurance coverage?
Well, let me make one thing clear. I am both a consumer and a provider of health care. I think among all the candidates here, I have and will be the expert on health care. I spoke with our President incumbent, Mr. Matt Gaetz, regarding that sometime in February last year, because I pleaded on behalf of all my patients who would be hit hard by repealing this medical care that we have without an absolute wonderful or viable replacement. Let me just tell you, I too was victimized when we were not able to be covered. But let's be clear, Florida ranks number 47th out of 50 states. That is a shame in terms of healthcare access. I have families suffering. I am here so that I can be the voice for them, because I know I've been in the trenches of this healthcare debacle, and I have some solutions.
All right, thank you, Ms. Zimmerman. And finally, this question to you, Mr. Dosif. What is your plan to help Americans get medical insurance coverage?
I think the most viable plan is to ensure that we have a viable economy. As more people go to work, there'll be competition for workers. And one of the ways that competition is going to manifest itself in healthcare is that they're going to be competing for workers, and they're going to have to be able to provide benefits and services to those employees. And that's really one of the solutions. I think that a strong economy and the things that President Trump is doing right now, and having lowered the unemployment rate, is the most direct way of getting people health care. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
All right.
We have a rebuttal.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Ms. Zimmerman?
Yes. If I may say so, as I said, there was an opportunity under the Affordable Care Act to actually expand Medicaid for the adults who are actually working. They fall into the trap. They fall into the cracks. They are the families that I serve. Unlike what my other co-candidates say here, the other competition, These families that I serve have been begging me for years. I have been servicing these families faithfully for over 20 years, and they've been begging me, Dr. Zimmerman, please do something. We work very hard. We can't afford the premiums, and yet we do not qualify under this Medicaid program. We need to have a governor that actually takes a look at that too.
All right, thank you, Ms. Zimmerman. And Mr. Gates, your rebuttal.
In response to that question, I'm the only candidate that provided a plan. Buying insurance across state lines, block granting Medicaid to the states. I actually passed tort reform when I was a state legislator. And this is an area where President Trump has done everything possible, but the Congress, frankly, has failed him. When the president was asked what members of Congress he relies on to get things done, he said Jim Jordan, Mark Meadows, Ron DeSantis, and Matt Gaetz. I can help fight for the president. I can help fight for better health care policies, and I'm the only candidate in this race endorsed by President Donald Trump. We can bring it home for the Trump agenda.
All right, thank you, candidates.
All right, we're moving on to question number 3, and Mr. Gates, we'll begin with you. This is our third question. Parts of Florida are witnessing an alarming rise of sea level. What is your opinion about the current resources dedicated to this issue, and what actions will you take to further address this potential crisis?
Yeah, I believe the Earth is warming, and I believe that humans contribute to that warming. I think that we've got to be able to plan for rising sea level in a few areas. First, there are parts of Florida that have sunny day floods where we've got to enhance our infrastructure, and we need to focus on critical infrastructure like energy and roadways. We also have to deal with bridges because rising sea levels mean that we have less and less clearance on the bridges that are essential in Northwest Florida for the movement of people and goods. And so I think we've got to acknowledge that, we've got to work toward it, but the answer is not a carbon tax. It is not to regulate the pollution into another country. The answer is to innovate better. So I believe in limited government, more innovation, that can spur better energy efficiency, but I don't want to go to Congress to argue with a thermometer anymore.
All right, thank you, Mr. Gates. Mr. Mills, this question now goes to you. Would you like for me to repeat it?
Yes, please.
Okay. Parts of Florida witnessing an alarming rise of sea level. What's your opinion about the current resources already dedicated to this, and what actions would you suggest we take to address it in the future?
I've had many years' experience in emergency management, so this would go back to the states and ask them on how to run their states. And we shouldn't, as federal entities, move into federal overreach once again and tell the states what they need to do. So each state is a little bit different, so we need to work with the states, work with the state emergency management, and get their feedback on the best approach going forward on that. So, thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mills. Ms. Zimmerman, would you like for me to repeat the question?
No, ma'am, it's okay. 3/4 of Florida, and in fact, we are a peninsula, so therefore this is an issue that is very vital to our economy, our tourism, our very survival. First of all, we must acknowledge that climate change is actual. It is happening. And it is not only affecting Florida. If we do not address this issue globally, it will affect all the other nations just as they have already been affected right now. It is also a matter of national security. We must acknowledge that it is happening. I disagree with Mr. Mills because I believe that if we have local infrastructure that we build up, we must also match that with the state level of funding and therefore federal, because this is happening all over the country, especially here in Florida.
All right, thank you, Ms. Zimmerman. Mr. Joseph.
Well, I don't subscribe to the notion of climate change and Americans and American engineers and ingenuity not being able to deal with this issue. I believe that a lot of this is driven by folks outside of what we would consider conservative circles and big money interests, but I think maybe my opponent's more concerned about the beaches in Walton County getting smaller with the rising water. Bottom line is this: we have other things and other priorities right now, and the number one priority is our economy, and that's what we should be focusing on.
All right, thank you, Mr. Joseph. Mr. Ayer.
So unlike Mr. Joseph, I think that focusing on the economy in the short term is not the responsible way to go from a strategic point of view. And I've been a naval strategist. We understand the national security implications of climate change, and they are rising tides, and it has to do more with force structure, but also with our safety in the greater intensity of storms, et cetera. So of the proposals that I would put forward, I would advocate for us to rejoin the Paris Agreement, to look at the voluntary caps on carbon emission, or just deal with the sustainable carbon economy. And we need to get the infrastructure on clean water and clean beaches.
Thank you, Mr. Ayer. Mr. Gates, did you have a rebuttal?
I did. President Trump was right to pull out of the Paris Climate Accord because it didn't solve the problem. It was just a way for the rest of the world to rip us off by taking our money and then imposing regulations on the United States that would not universally apply to other polluters in the world. This is where liberals are totally wrong on the environment. In the United States, our innovations have always spread around the world faster than our regulations. So I believe in an innovative approach to the problem, not a big government regulatory approach. That was why President Trump was right. The Paris deal was a bad deal.
All right, thank you, Mr. Gates. And we have a rebuttal from Ms. Zimmerman.
I just have something short to say. Remember, we can also not rely on a lot of these carbon emissions. We can survive also, or actually encourage the development of certain other areas such as solar panels. By the way, China produces a lot of these solar panels. And what do we do? Instead of encouraging alternative sources, we actually put a tariff. Therefore, it is now more difficult to develop this kind of energy for our country. This would be a lot better in terms of controlling climate change.
All right, thank you, Ms. Zimmerman. Mr. Mills?
Sure. I don't buy into the whole climate change rhetoric that the liberal left puts on. Our climate is going to change whether we humans are here or not. In the Paris Accord, I agree that we should have gotten out, or it's a ripoff, and so I do agree with the Trump's agenda on getting us out of that agreement. Thanks.
Thank you, candidates. Any other rebuttals before we take a quick break? All right, well, thank you so much. And we are going to take a quick break. We will continue with our questions for these candidates when we come back.
Thanks for watching this year's rally event on WSRE TV. I am Elizabeth King. Ray Hodkins and I serve as co-presidents of the League of Women Voters of the Pensacola Bay Area. For nearly 30 years, the leagues here and in Okaloosa County have provided questions for events like tonight's forum as a service to our local communities. Our democracy is based on active participation by informed citizens, and voting is an important way to participate. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization, which means we don't support or oppose parties or candidates. We work to increase understanding of major public policy issues and encourage informed and active participation in government. This rally is one of the ways for us to make accurate and nonpartisan information available to voters. You can also contact us for explanations of amendments and other ballot issues. We invite women and men to attend our public events or to join us as members of the League. For more information, visit lwvpba.org or lwvokaloosa.org. And please remember to be an informed voter this year.
There are 3 ways to cast a ballot in Santa Rosa County: by mail, early voting, or at your precinct on Election Day. To vote by mail, contact the Santa Rosa County Supervisor of Elections office by phone, mail, fax, or email. Ballots must reach the Supervisor of Elections office by 7 p.m. on Election Day. Early voting takes place from Monday, August 13th through Saturday, August 25th in Milton, Pace, and at 2 locations in the Greater Gulf Breeze area. Early voting hours each day are 8:30 a.m. until 4:30 p.m. On the day of the primary election, Tuesday, August 28th, voting takes place from 7 a.m. until 7 p.m. You must vote in the precinct in which you live and are registered, and be sure to bring photo and signature ID with you. And welcome back. Time now to resume our questions to the candidates for U.S. Congress District 1.
We began the last round with Mr. Gates, and so question 4 will go first to Mr. Mills. And if you're ready, based on the aging of the U.S. interstate highway system, what are your recommendations for maintenance of the transportation infrastructure?
The interstate highway system is crumbling. You can drive across, and many highways are always under construction. It definitely is a problem, and it is an issue for the federal government to address. We definitely need to rack and stack the priorities of how we're going to deal with the infrastructure which repairs are more needed than others. And here again, we need to involve the states to help understand the critical infrastructure of each state and have them give their inputs to us as well. So thanks.
All right, thank you. Ms. Zimmerman, this question to you, based on the aging of the U.S. interstate highway system, what are your recommendations for maintenance of this transportation infrastructure?
To me, infrastructure is very vital to our economy, to the safety of our citizens, and overall, just imagine with those aging infrastructures, we will have further crises. Look at what happened in Flint, Michigan. Because of the problem of the water system eroding and releasing lead into the water system they had in Flint, there were a lot of children who were affected, adults, a lot of learning disabilities. I actually met the pediatrician who discovered the problem of lead poisoning in Michigan. We must improve our waterway system. We must improve our infrastructure. It is for the safety of this nation. We must prioritize. If we can give tax cuts to the rich, we can rebuild our infrastructure.
All right, thank you, Ms. Zimmerman. This question next to you, Mr. Dosif. What are your recommendations for maintenance of the aging interstate highway system?
Well, focusing on the interstate system, we have to realize that that is in fact one of the functions of the federal government, providing the opportunities for commerce and interstate travel. So it must be a priority, but we have to recognize it comes at a significant cost, and that cost need not be bared, or those monies need not be frivolously spent on other areas that are not federally required services to the nation. We have to pick our priorities, and that should be one of them at the federal level.
All right, thank you. Mr. Ayer, this question to you. Do you need me to repeat it?
No, that's fine. So it was President Eisenhower, I believe, who brought in a big grand scheme, a Republican president bringing a big grand scheme of interstate transportation, and thank goodness he did. So where is the 2017 or 2018 infrastructure bill? Where is it? It's not here. It's not here because of legislative malpractice by the current administration and our Congress, our dysfunctional Congress, that has not addressed critical infrastructure of the interstate highway system and our clean water infrastructure that we need right here in Northwest Florida.
All right, thank you. Mr. Gates?
Well, the one area where Phil and I may agree is that Congress is entirely dysfunctional. I mostly blame Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell over in the Senate for not taking up and passing the over 500 bills that the House has moved. I'm focused on the infrastructure that impacts my constituents, my bosses, right here in Northwest Florida. And I know how to get infrastructure dollars. We got $500 million out of the 5-year transportation work plan, and we got that $500 million into the new Pensacola Bay Bridge. Leadership in our delegation is the reason why we won't have a toll on that bridge that would have been a tax on working families in Northwest Florida. My relationship with the president will help Northwest Florida because I'll be able to go and point out the traffic people in Crestview are in, the traffic that Highway 98 causes, the impacts on our military mission, and that's one of the reasons why President Trump is endorsing me in this campaign.
All right, thank you, Mr. Gates. We have a rebuttal from Mr. Dosif.
Yes, ma'am. What we have also is $1.5 billion in Triumph Gulf Coast monies that is, first off, an unconstitutional construct. Those monies should be distributed to the counties right now. My opponent, Matt Gaetz, decided that was appropriate to stick another level of government over the top of the government system that we already have between the legislature and county commissions. That's incorrect, inappropriate, and those monies should be released immediately to the people of Northwest Florida so they can fix some of the things that need to be fixed.
Rebuttal, Mr. Gates.
$2 million to support industry certifications in our schools in Escambia County. Over $8 million invested to support the mission at Whiting Field. $75 million we're working to set aside so that people in Crestview don't spend their lives in traffic. This is the work of Triumph Gulf Coast, and I'm incredibly proud of it. It's not a new layer of government. It's a way to make sure that Tallahassee doesn't steal our resources. They would have taken that BP money and they would have spent it in Tampa or Miami, but we had strong legislative leadership. I was a part of it, and the impact is improving quality of life for students and improving quality of life for workers throughout Northwest Florida.
All right, one more rebuttal, Mr.
Yeah, that in fact is not correct. Just giving away no, it isn't. 2 million, well, what's that?
You already spoke on this issue.
Okay.
I think it's Ms. Zimmerman's, or Dr. Zimmerman's rebuttal.
Did you have a rebuttal, ma'am?
Just a small amount.
Okay. Ms. Zimmerman.
Well, I just wanted to remind everyone here, as the one who probably has been, who has lived both in Crestview and also here in Northwest Florida or here in Escambia County and Santa Rosa County. If you remember right, when Ivan hit, Interstate 10 collapsed. That was a major problem. It was also very difficult to go in and out from any area between Escambia and Santa Rosa County. I was there. It was very difficult. We had crumbling roads. It was a circuitous route. You have to make sure that our infrastructure and our roads are viable, because it will paralyze the economy and the safety of our citizens.
All right, thank you, Ms. Zimmerman. We'll hold it there. We'll move to the next question.
All right, question number 5, and Ms. Zimmerman, we begin with you. At this time, Congress has failed to address the status of 800,000 Dreamers, despite the fact that 87% of Americans support the DREAM Act. What action do you think should be taken on this issue?
First of all, as I stated, I am different from the other candidates here. I did come in as an immigrant. I came in on a J-1 visa. Perhaps most Americans are not aware that there are several visas that are available to come in here. If you remember what you were doing as a 2 or 3-year-old, good luck or congratulations. But if you were brought in here as a child, how on earth would you have known what your status would be? I believe that you have been here, you followed the rules, you played by the rules, you are an educated person, and you are a taxpayer. You should be given an avenue to be able to achieve that pathway to citizenship. If you have been a productive citizen or a productive member of this society, why not create a pathway for you?
All right, thanks, Ms. Zimmerman. Mr. Joseph, here's the question for you. At this time, Congress has failed to address the status of 800,000 Dreamers, despite the fact that 87% of Americans support the DREAM Act. What actions do you think should be taken on this issue?
Well, first, the president provided an action, almost increasing that number by 3 times what the Democrats were asking, and they failed to bite on it, which is unfortunate, because I think he was prepared to provide them an answer and response. But as far as the American people are concerned, the American people are generous people, but they want to know their government is looking out for their interests first. We need to secure the border. We need to make sure that the laws that we currently have regarding immigration are enforced. And the Congress needs to get to work on an immigration plan that is comprehensive. It is not the president's job. It's a Congress, and they have failed dramatically.
Mr. Ayer.
So this issue is often couched in Republican versus Democrat about the Dreamers. Well, this is an opportunity for us to take a pragmatic view and say, hey, what did the U.S. government under the previous president make? He made a commitment of our country from the executive for something to try to change something, fix something that the Congress had failed to deal with. I agree we must have comprehensive immigration reform to include the Dreamers, but for right now, we need to keep the Dreamers in our country and live up to the commitment that our chief executive gave a few years ago, and get on with a plan to look to the future, not derail and degrade the past.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ayer. Mr. Gates.
We don't need comprehensive immigration reform. We need to build the wall. We need to end sanctuary cities. We need to institute E-Verify. We need to be tough on borders and tough on illegal immigration so that we do not allow lawlessness to happen in this country. When President Trump endorsed me, he tweeted that one of the reasons why he needed me back in Congress was because I was tough on illegal immigration. This is something that costs American taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars, probably billions of dollars. And so I'll be tough on borders, and only after we secure the border will we have a conversation about the rest of this stuff. If this election was about the Dreamers, Hillary Clinton would have won it in 2016. This was an election about building a wall and border security. That's my policy, to stop illegal immigration.
Ms. Zimmerman, I believe you have a rebuttal.
Yes. I would just like to remind everyone, as an immigrant, I did pay taxes the whole time. And I can tell you, these Dreamers and their families, they have paid taxes here in one way or another. In fact, if you conduct a study, immigrants, they actually contribute to the fabric of this society and the economy. Billions and billions of dollars. Now, we must not exploit these Dreamers. When I believe that we must protect our borders, but it doesn't mean that we must enforce our immigration law in not a compassionate manner. These people have not broken anything. They have contributed to society. They are not lawless people. They have contributed to society. Let me just make that clear.
Okay, Ms. Zimmerman, were there any other rebuttals? Okay, Mr. Ayer.
Okay, so illegal immigration is bad. Legal immigration is good, and it ought to be, Congress needs to step up to the plate. The wall would be a monument to fear, a waste of resources, ineffective, and not worth Mexico's money. The previous election is not in play here. The election for now is to go forward. How do we go forward with immigration and border security? We need border security. We don't need a wasteful spend on a wall.
Okay.
Yeah. Dr. Zimmerman is terribly wrong about this. She says that illegal immigrants haven't broken the law. Unlawful entry into the United States of America is a crime. I support President Trump's plan to have zero tolerance for illegal immigration. We've got to make sure people know in Central and South America that if they come to this country illegally, that we do not have the compassion and the resources to care for every single person in the world. We need to care for Americans, for American children. We need to put America first. That's the agenda that I'm fighting for in Congress, and that's one of the reasons I can be trusted to stop illegal immigration.
Okay. Mr. Joseph, this is your rebuttal?
Yes, ma'am.
And then we'll move the question to Mr.
Therein
Mills.
lies the problem. You see, immigration isn't just about illegal immigration. Even the legal immigration system is broken. So there are plenty of people exploiting the legal immigration system, to include my opponent that's proposing visa opportunities for folks that will end up depressing wages of American workers. See, that's what happens in Congress. They find ways legally to do things that are not in the best interest of American workers by passing H-2B, H-2C requirements that somehow circumvent what we would consider fair to American workers.
All right, thank you, Mr. Joseph. All right, Mr. Mills, and we take this question to you. Would you like for me to repeat it?
Well, we've been all over the board, but I think I've got it. Immigration is an issue, illegal and legal. I've personally spoken to some folks that have they did it properly, and it's taken them 23 years to get their immigration status. That's a system that's broke. I agree with securing our borders, building a wall. National security, our borders are an issue of national security, so we must look at that. We must look at how we can reform immigration, both to make it not take 23 years for someone to immigrate here to this great country of ours.
Thank you, Mr. Mills. Would you like to rebut Mr. Mills' statement? Go ahead, please, Ms. Zimmerman.
I would just like to inform everyone that it took me 11 years, even despite being married to an American. But each visa and each entry into the United States of America is individual. They have hundreds of visas that are available. What we're talking about are these children that were brought in here. We're talking about the dreamers. They're called the dreamers because they have fulfilled certain requirements. And one of them is that they were brought in here. Yes, you may have considered them illegal entry, but they were children. Children. I doubt if this man here would have said to their mothers, no, I don't want to go in there because I'd be illegal. There is no way they would have known.
All right, thank you, Ms. Zimmerman.
All right, we're moving on to our next question, and it will go first to Mr. Joseph. The North American Free Trade Agreement, also known as NAFTA, covers trade among the U.S., Mexico, and Canada. Please explain your position in making changes to this agreement.
President Trump is correct in renegotiating NAFTA. He was correct in doing away with the Trans-Pacific Partnership. He's correct in the sense that these were poorly negotiated. I have much greater confidence in his ability to renegotiate those things because now we have the data, and the data is clear. It has not been in the best interest of the American worker. In fact, it's taken away millions of jobs from us here and sent them to Asia and to Mexico. We need to renegotiate NAFTA so it serves us fairly. That's what we're looking for here, and I support President Trump's efforts.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ayer. Next to you, what is your position on making changes to NAFTA?
NAFTA needs to be renegotiated, and so I support the idea of renegotiation. What the President has done in it is put in a lot of unnecessary drama, particularly in his G8 summit or in his relations with Canada, of all countries. But hey, it's bigger than that. It's bigger than just NAFTA. It is the trade wars that our incumbent congressman is apparently supporting because of his loyalty to a president who's taking us into an economic war that with other countries in a reckless fashion, and that includes the NAFTA negotiation. I disagree that pulling out of the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership it was a good idea. It needed to be renegotiated as well, with American workers on the forefront of those negotiations.
Mr. Gates.
Well, Phil's right that I've been loyal to our president, and the consequence has been improving conditions for American workers. Of course we should renegotiate NAFTA in a way that puts American interests first. The Trump presidency has brought the highest sense of optimism among manufacturers in over 25 years. We'd have had the longest streak of consecutive job creation in America's history. We've got GDP growth that is doubling. Working alongside this president for this amazing district is one of the great honors of my life. It's one of the reasons I'm here to ask you for your vote, so I can keep working for the Trump agenda. And Donald Trump knows which candidate here can help him. That's why he's endorsed me in this campaign, so that we can renegotiate NAFTA and continue this amazing economic run that the country's on.
All right, thank you, sir. Mr. Mills, to you, explain your position on making changes to NAFTA.
Get out. Get out of the United Nations, get out of NAFTA. Anything that jeopardizes our nation's republic, we need to get out. We're a constitutional republic, and getting into these bilateral, trilateral, any kind of agreement that jeopardizes our nation's sovereignty is bad. We need to get out, and get out now.
Rebuttal, Mr. Gates.
Yes, I want to say I am in violent agreement with John Mills on the issue of getting out of the United Nations, and I'm glad you raised it. I'm one of the sponsors of the legislation to get out of the UN. It's one of the reasons why the liberal left wants me to lose this race, because I've been fighting on the leading edge of the conservative issues that should unite and hold together this great Trump coalition. So I think what the president has done, not only with NAFTA and the UN, but with NATO, has really helped, because we've seen greater contributions from our allies. So all over the world, you see the art of the deal at work, and the result is it's better for America.
All right, thank you. Rebuttal, Mr. Ayer.
So the art of the deal in security arrangements and in trade arrangements is not doing well for our American interests. The World War II generation set up the United Nations for good reason, and it needs reform. NATO needs some reform, but overall, those soldiers, those NATO soldiers, are with us, dying with us when we called. And as a former retired naval officer serving alongside NATO soldiers, I know that they are with us because we're with them. It's an alliance. It's not a transaction.
Mr. Dosif.
Yes, our congressman claims that he's put this forward to get us out of the United Nations. Now, I don't know how that affects the people here in Northwest Florida, but I do know this. He also wanted to eliminate the EPA. Now, I got to tell you, that's a bit absurd, given the fact that where we find ourselves downstream of Alabama and Georgia, that seriously affects the people in Northwest Florida, and very many people are very upset with that proposal because it was a stunt. He knew very well that it was going nowhere.
All right, thank you. And finally to you, Ms. Zimmerman, explain your position on making changes to NAFTA.
Let me be clear. We cannot be an isolationist country. We are now part of a greater global economy. We cannot manufacture 100% of everything that we need. We must encourage more relationships with our allies. I am the daughter of a World War II veteran and a prisoner of war. I know what saved my father. It was the allies. It was the other men in uniform. It was different countries. There is no way, when there is so much strife and hatred around the world, that we will alienate all our allies. Whatever trade agreements that we must do it with all our allies in mind. There is no way that we can keep all those jobs in here without encouraging further partnerships with other countries of the world.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Rebuttal, Mr. Mills.
The United Nations, it's not about working with our allies. It's working with allies is great. What I'm talking about is when you jeopardize our nation's sovereignty, when you jeopardize our constitutional republic, that's what I'm very, very concerned about. I too am a naval officer. I'm a retired Navy pilot. I'm still working for the Navy. I've worked for the Navy for 37 years. I took an oath to defend my Constitution. I know what it is, and anytime we jeopardize our nation's sovereignty, we're doing bad for ourselves. If we lose our constitutional republic, we've lost everything. Thanks.
All right, thank you. All right, turning now to our next question, question number 7. We begin with you, Mr. Ayer. The administration has proposed combining the Department of Education and Labor. Please tell us your position on this issue.
Okay, I am not familiar with the details of this issue, so I will say just on a theoretical basis, it seems like something that should be proposed and should be examined. I don't think that we need to dilute, however, the services or the federal money coming to the states that ends up in our county school systems, particularly workforce development, particularly the Secondary and Education Act. That legislation needs to be continued as a federal role in the provision of resources for local people to make decisions on local education.
Thank you, Mr. Ayer. Mr. Gates?
Yeah, Chris Dosseff's right. I want to abolish the EPA, and I also want to abolish the Federal Department of Education. The reason? Both are unconstitutional. The Constitution doesn't exist to serve us when it's convenient. The Constitution exists to constrain government, and especially constrain the federal government. I don't know a single teacher or principal or school board member in Northwest Florida who wakes up and says, thank goodness there's a federal Department of Education that's 8 stories high, that takes up an entire city block. The Department of Education doesn't educate a single child. They don't help or support a single teacher or principal. They create more paperwork to justify their own existence, and then when they're done with federal service, they become a consultant on how to comply with the crazy rules that they wrote. That's why I want to get rid of unconstitutional agencies. It's what makes me a constitutional conservative.
All right, Mr. Ayer?
So the Constitution was invoked in a radical ideological fashion. Notice that when Mr. Gates was talking about that, he was not talking about the functions or the benefits that the federal government is providing for education across the country. He's talking about a constitutional construct that is an age-old discussion. And look at Article 1, look at the common good clause of Article 1, and there are many things that are hung on that. And what he's saying is that there's no role for the federal government in education. I think there's an empowering role for the federal government in local education.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ayer. Mr. Mills, we now turn this question to you. The administration has proposed combining the Department of Education and Labor. Please explain your position on the issue.
On this one, I do agree with our current congressman that the Department of Education is no business for the federal government to be in. It's unconstitutional. I agree with him on that. Common Core has come out of this. It's garbage. We don't need it. The states need to run the school systems in their states, and we need to drill it down to the local level. The local level needs to decide how to run their schools. The parents, the local community needs to get involved with this, not the federal government. We complain about federal government overreach, but yet you want to invite it into our school system. The Department of Education needs to go away. I do not agree with combining it. And there's many other departments that need to go with the Department of Education and exit stage right.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mills. Ms. Zimmerman, question now goes to you. Would you like for me to repeat it?
No, it's okay. Education has saved the lives of my mother, my sisters, and myself. I'm in the United States of America because of good public education. I'm a doctor of medicine because I was able to go to a higher institution of learning. There is no way that I would agree to abolish the Department of Education. We have children who need to be able to compete globally. We rank very low in terms of mathematics, science, and technology. Instead of putting down the Department of Education, we must actually build it up and make sure it has proper funding. I am for universal pre-K. I am for children to get the best of what they can do from a good education, because it is the great equalizer. It is a nonpartisan issue, and everyone must have the equal access to good education.
Thank you, Ms. Zimmerman. And now, Mr. Dosseff.
The question again, please.
Okay, yes. The administration has proposed combining the Department of Education and Labor. What is your position on this issue?
I think that's a very good idea. One, you would eliminate the Department of Education, which I think would be appropriate. More significantly, I believe that that function should be a clearinghouse where they maintain and monitor what's happening internationally with regards to education standards, and it should be fed right to the Department of Labor, because that's what we're preparing students for, to enter into the workforce. And I think it's very important that they know, at least gauge our workforce's ability and how they compete amongst people around the rest of the world. I grew up in a technical school. I went to a high school where people learned how to be machinists and welders and auto mechanics. And we find now that this whole education process has come full circle. And they're trying to do that everywhere in the state.
All right, thank you, Mr. Joseph. And that wraps up our questions for our congressional candidates. We are going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll have closing statements. Stay with us.
Thanks for watching this year's rally event on WSRE TV. I'm Mary Blackwell, President of the League of Women Voters of Okaloosa and Walton Counties. For decades, the Okaloosa, Walton, and Pensacola Bay Area Leagues have provided questions for events like tonight's forum as a service to our local communities. The success of our democracy depends on active participation by informed citizens, which begins with voting. The League of Women Voters is nonpartisan, which means we don't support or oppose parties or candidates. This rally is one way for us to make accurate and nonpartisan information available to voters. You can also contact us for explanations of amendments, merit retention of judges, and other ballot issues. We invite women and men to attend our public events or join us as members of League. Please see our website for more information or to contact us. And please remember to be an informed voter this year.
There are 3 ways to cast a ballot in Okaloosa County: by mail, early voting, or at your precinct on Election Day. To vote by mail, contact the Okaloosa County Supervisor of Elections office. You can write, phone, fax, email, log on to their website, or visit the supervisor's office locations in Crestview and Fort Walton Beach. Ballots must reach the Supervisor of Elections offices by 7 p.m. on Election Day. Early voting takes place from Saturday, August 18th through Saturday, August 25th at the 5 locations listed on screen. Hours for early voting are 10 a.m. until 6 p.m. each day. On the day of the primary election, Tuesday, August 28th, voting takes place at your polling location from 7 a.m. until 7 p.m. You must vote in the precinct in which you live and are registered. Be sure to bring photo and signature ID with you. Welcome back to WSRE's Rally 2018. We have wrapped up our question and answer session for the candidates for U.S. Congress District 1. It is time now for their closing statements.
Now, each candidate will have 45 seconds, and we began with Mr. Ayer on our last question, and so the concluding statements will begin with Mr. Gates as we continue to move alphabetically. Mr. Gates.
If you've already voted for me, thank you. If you're going to vote for me, I hope you vote early, and you can go to mattgates.com to find an early voting location. And if you're still undecided, I'm here to ask for your vote. My name's Matt Gates. I'm Northwest Florida's outspoken pro-life, pro-gun conservative congressman. I'm the only person here who's endorsed by Donald Trump and the NRA. I want to go back to Congress to keep fighting for you, to keep fighting against the Department of Justice and the FBI when they mistreat our president, to keep fighting against the overreach of the federal government, and to keep fighting for our military families and investing in Northwest Florida's military mission. We got 3,000 more warfighters that call Northwest Florida home since when I started in this job, and I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that Northwest Florida is the most military-friendly community and the most military-friendly state in the country.
All right, thank you, Mr. Gates. Mr. Mills, your closing statement.
Sure, I'm John Mills. I appreciate your vote, appreciate your support. johnmillsforcongress.com. I've served my country for 37 years now. I took an oath of office, which has never expired, by the way, to defend my Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. My concern right now are the enemies that are domestic. They're up in Washington, they're in the swamp. They take an oath very similar to ours to defend our Constitution, but unfortunately special interests and dark shadow government and all this special interest money has made them do things they shouldn't be doing. They've drunk the swamp juice, if you will. So our constitutional republic is in danger. I want to preserve our constitutional republic at all costs. In the military, if we woke up one day and decided not to follow our oath of office, we'd be court-martialed. We need to hold the folks up in Washington accountable the same way as we would be held accountable if we broke our oath in the military. Thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. And to Ms. Zimmerman, your closing statement.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jennifer Zimmerman. As the daughter of a guerrilla fighter, a prisoner of war, and a World War II veteran, what lies in my genes and my DNA is a fighter. I have been in Northwest Florida now serving the underserved children for over 2 decades. I have faithfully served with my lab coat and my stethoscope as my weapon. I have been in the trenches with you. I was here during Ivan in labor and delivery room 2 at Santa Rosa Medical Center. I was here during 9/11. I was in Crestview in 1999. I have been here. You have trusted me with the most precious resources of your life, your children. Trust me as I bring all your voices that I have heard through all these years. Trust me because I will bring it to Washington. You have never heard this kind of voice before. Trust me this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zimmerman. To Mr. Dosiv, your closing remarks.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Very happy to have had this opportunity to discuss some of these issues with you. I have, in fact, fought for our country as a Marine. 28 years ago, I led a squadron from Cherry Point, North Carolina, to Arabia, to Sheikh Isa in Bahrain, defending Marines on the field of battle. We have 3 sons, 1 an engineer, 2 Marine officers. My wife and I have raised 8 children. I've run a business for the last 24 years. We know what it means to raise a family. We know what it means to run a business. And we know what it means to sacrifice for the good people of this country in our national interest. I ask for your vote, humbly, so that I can represent you. Donald Trump places great confidence in the Marines that serve with him, like General Mattis and General Kelly, and I hope to join them there as another Marine backing up our president. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And finally to you, Mr. Ayer.
Our nation is in trouble. Like many patriots, I'm answering the call. I'm the best fit for Northwest Florida because of my record of service before, during, and after the 26 years in the United States Navy enlisted in officer service. See our website for details. I'll fight for working families, and that means good paying jobs, affordable health care, good public schools, guaranteed Medicare and Social Security, and a sustainable environment. Look, we have a winning campaign. We have committed people in a voluntary campaign, and I'm proud to be endorsed by the Florida AFL-CIO on behalf of working families. Voters are going to be the heroes of this, our most consequential election, midterm election in our lifetime. Take a bold step with the AIR campaign into a brighter future.
Thank you, Mr. Ayer, and thanks to all of our candidates for Congress District 1. And that is going to do it for tonight, night 1 of Rally 2018.
That's right, Sandra. We've got 2 more nights ahead, and when we return tomorrow, Tuesday night at 7, we'll meet the candidates for Okaloosa School Board Districts 1, 3, and 5, as well as Santa Rosa County School Board Districts 1, 3, and 5, and Escambia County School Board Districts 1, 2, and 3.
And on Wednesday night, we'll focus on the contest for Santa Rosa Commission Districts 2 and 4, Escambia Commission Districts 2 and 4, as well as the race for Mayor of Pensacola.
And we certainly hope that you will join us again right here on WSRE TV tomorrow night at 7 as we continue with Rally 2018.
Our thanks to the League of Women Voters for their participation in this program and to Pensacola State College. Rally 2018 is a service of WSRE PBS for the Gulf Coast. This week marks the start of WSRE's August membership drive, and it is because of the support of viewers like you that we are able to present vital public service programs such as Rally. Please tune in later tonight for WSRE's Pledge Drive in support of public television. Thank you for joining us and have a great evening.